Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, all the things. I'm excited for today's episode. We are both recording in an airport, so if you hear something going on in the background, that would be why. But it's kind of funny. I think it's kind of cool. So JW and I just met. He's actually out of Wyoming, used to run a horse ranch, kind of still does some of that from what I gather, now into selling ranch properties across the States, but also getting into like Costa Rica and outside the States, which is really cool. Definitely family guy. So really excited to get into your story. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, absolutely, Angela. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get into things. So what got you into ranching, period? Let's start with that.
Well, so I have this grandfather that was like my childhood hero, right? He always wore his cowboy hat around and had a long history of being in the ranching industry. And growing up, I grew up around John Wayne and Jesus, and my grandfather was like my best friend, right? So there really was no other path for me other than to follow grandpa's footsteps into this ranching world, whether that means, being a cowboy physically or whether it meant owning or managing the ranches, right? And so that's really what inspired me early on to get into this industry.
Awesome. And so you got into horses. So how long have you been in ranching then? Your whole life, I'm gathering.
Yeah. So my dad didn't pursue ranching, but we grew up in rural America and we were around, farmers and ranchers and agriculture our whole life. And, our first jobs dating back to, being 14, 15, 16 years old, were working for, that heartland, American farmer or rancher that had jobs for teenagers, the physical labor out in the field, building fences or irrigating or taking care of the equipment or the livestock. And so, it started for me at a very young age.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I grew up with horses. I don't know if you knew that. Oh, I didn't really grow up with them. I got into horses. I got training for about 17 years professionally. So I know that you learn a lot of work ethic. So what are some of the things you learned through the horses and through the ranching? And then what has caused you to transition from that into, I guess, ranch sales?
Sure. Yeah, so I did kind of know that about you, but I didn't know much of that about you. Yeah, so horses became like my biggest passion for 20 plus years. We raised rodeo horses and rodeoed, and we trained horses for the public. And I guess the dreamy side of that a lot of people don't see is it's easy to make the video of riding the horse, out with a big grand mountain view in the background. But there is so much discipline and labor that goes in to the work. There's no, it's a daylight till dusk sort of a work environment where in order to have those horses and to feed them and clean up after them and then to go out and use them in performances and for using them as a business and sales and all these different things, it's a nonstop effort of work from daylight till dark, And so I think horses for the most part brought me my greatest joys and passions, but they also taught me like the disciplines and the systems that, that are needed for work and business on a day-to-day basis. And not only for that, but even our personal growth and development. We got to just wake up and put in the proper work in order to get the results we want. And oftentimes, in that horse world, I wanted these big results. But if I didn't set up the right work and disciplines, I'd never get to that result, right? And so 20 years later, my body was pretty beat up. And I had several surgeries over like 3 years on different body parts and this and that. And so I still own a dozen horses and even a couple of mules that I love to ride. And I still rope cattle at some amateur rodeos and things. And so I'm still on it and I'm heavily involved as a lifestyle, but it's not my career anymore. And I transitioned into the ranch sales, which really offered me a higher ticket value for my family as far as money goes. We could earn more and kind of create some different time for ourselves as a family. And so it was a very smart move for us because we knew the industry. It wasn't like we were just jumping out of our industry and starting into something we didn't know about. We actually knew about all of the agriculture, the ranching, the equine endeavors. All we had to do was kind of bring ourselves up to speed on, the sales side of it, working with title companies and real estate contracts and attorneys. So those are all things that are learnable. So we kind of combined something we already knew with something we could learn, and here we are, and we've done really well with it. So
that's really cool. So what are some things that you've had to overcome, going from, even getting into ranching maybe, but then going from ranching to now getting out of ranching kind of and selling, ranches? What are some things what are some obstacles that you've had to overcome, and how have you overcome them?
Sure. I would say,
them.
yeah. One obstacle for me, and I love to talk about this one because my dad was a public speaker, and from an early age, people told me, "Oh, you're such a good communicator, and you're such a good speaker." But as I got older, I realized that communication is really multifaceted, and you could be a great public speaker, but you might be a terrible communicator in some other ways, right? And so a lot of communication when I started getting into real estate, there were a lot of really direct conversations and things I needed to have that I sometimes would try to avoid. But then I would go home and keep telling myself this childhood narrative that, oh, you're such a good speaker and such a good communicator and this and that. And I really had to overcome that old childhood, all these old voices telling me that I was a good communicator and say, hey, stop. You need to learn better communication skills. And it has nothing to do with whether you can talk on a podcast or maybe speak in front of a class when you're teaching. Communication also has to do with those individual conversations with your wife or your children or a real estate client. And so I had to take a step back and overcome, the idea of how to become a better communicator. And it's probably the number one skill I think a lot of us need to step back and learn.
So tell me a little bit more about that. Like how are you working on that? And, it's interesting that, one of the things a lot of people have struggle with, feeling good about themselves. I guess that's a way to put it. And so this was something that they told you was a strength, and you're kind of like, I don't know if you call it get rid of it, but don't use it as a crutch to not get better. So yeah,
sure.
Expand more about that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So personally, I have always been around competitive things, like for instance, rodeo, going back to my story a little bit, but rodeo, you got to rope the horns or rope the feet. You have a target, or we work a lot in the hunting and fishing space out here in Wyoming, and there's targets to hit, we're shooting guns and hitting a target. And so I kind of took it on from the practical side of my life. I brought it into that personal growth and development space and said, how can I hit that target that's in front of me? So my new target was, how do I go meet, this month, how do I meet 100 people that I've never met before? And I would kind of set a target in front of me. And I would do that each month when I first started out in real estate, or when do I respond to a difficult conversation in a real estate contract? And I never put it off. I always said, we're going to make the most difficult phone call of the day first, right? And so I started adding these little things in, and then bringing in a few close friends that would hold me accountable and say, hey, at the end of the month, were you avoiding any of those difficult conversations, or were you simply going and talking to the same people you've always went and talked to, or did you meet 100 new people this month? Or whatever the target number is not as important as actually having a target to hit, right?
Yeah.
And you can always build that out later. So I kind of personally built a target for each month related to my communication. And then I would try to attack that one target. And slowly those have built into better habits, right? But I still put those targets out in front of me. They just kind of change each month.
So have you always been driven like that, or is this something you have worked on?
I've been a very driven person since I was young, yes. So that's not a new thing for me. I think the drive, though, I had to understand how to repurpose the drive into things that mattered versus maybe things that didn't matter.
Hmm.
So, or maybe they needed to be more specific to something versus broad. And the ability to narrow something down into that actionable step versus just this broad, vision. I mean, the vision part of things is always excellent, as a lot of people teach, but how to bring that vision all the way down to the action steps can be very difficult. And it maybe is the separator from those that are moving ahead and finding progress and those that are stuck.
What are some tips that you would give someone that's stuck? That, we got probably a lot of young entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs listening and watching. And, I'm always trying to think of tangible ways to help them become, quote, successful, whatever that means to them. But what are some things that, you think could help someone do that work? Like, a lot of people have a huge vision and don't back it up, and
Sure.
Yeah, what do you got for some ideas?
Well, there's a lot of practical ideas that, probably in a short little phone call, we can't get into all of them, but I guess I a little bit try to break down things into, okay, what can I control right now about this situation? Like, what are actions I can do? And then second of all, what are things that I can't do and aren't going to help this situation? So I can kind of separate the two and start making decisions that I can actually put my work and efforts into something that's moving me forward to the next step. And being from the mountains, for my, physical fitness side of life, I love to just go hike, and just climb the mountain or hike on the forest trail. And you really can come across all sorts of obstacles on that trail. But one thing you can't do is you can't ever just stop. You have to just keep putting another foot forward each and every time. And so by kind of deciphering what's in my control and what's outside of my control, I'm able to really push my actions, into things that I can absolutely move the needle forward on. And then another one that I always talk about is your ability to pivot, because sometimes you will encounter something that you don't really see a way through, or see something, but there is a way around it. You just might need to pivot and rethink it. But the key is that you make a decision and move, and don't just sit there stuck. You need to just pivot and move in a different direction. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is important that we keep the momentum and the movement going.
So on days, I'm sure there's days you don't feel like doing the work. I'm sure. No one's quite superhuman. So what motivates you to get out of bed and do the work on the days you don't feel like it?
So for me, my primary motivation is my family. I will be married 20 years this year in August, and I built a wonderful life with my wife, and I have 3 children. They're now, 2 of them are young adults, and I have a 9-year-old that's quickly becoming a young adult. So probably my biggest motivation is, the life that we've created, my wife and I, really has a lot to do with those my kids. They're involved in everything we do, from work to they do. I turn a lot of my social media stuff just over to my kids, like, do this for me. I can't do all this. You could take care of it. You're smarter about it anyway. But they're involved in all parts of our life in business. And when it comes to them, I don't ever want them to think that I didn't give it my all. And that's not just in monetary value, although that is part of the target. but I want them to think about their dad, their mom, when it comes to our personal development and growth and our cash flow and, our energy and our legacy. I want them to see an example of how to live life to its maximum potential. And because of that, I wake up every day, even when I don't feel like it, and I try to give them the example so they can carry on the legacy, down the road to possibly their own kids or just to their associates and the people that they have relationships in their lifetime.
That's good. So you mentioned associations and people keeping you accountable. How, on a scale of 1 to 10, like what do you feel the importance of associations and the accountability? Because you mentioned two things that I've heard lots, is to building a successful business.
I grew up and the word accountability was used a lot through church. And this isn't about your religious beliefs or your affiliations or anything like that. But I never really saw the word accountability like acted out correctly, very, very well. And it takes a special and unique relationship and somebody that's really willing. And I'll bring a word out here that's interesting, but someone that's really willing to be honest with you and you with them, right? So if I say I want accountability from, my best friend or a business partner or a coach that I hire, but then if I'm not honest with that coach and I give him dishonest results, he can't coach me well because he doesn't know all the facts. And then vice versa, if that person or maybe your best friend that you've always wanted, that you've loved since high school, but you want him to give you advice about a certain topic, if he won't be direct and honest with you, then his advice to you isn't sound either. So that honesty really goes both ways. And I think the problem, and right now, with my children being teenagers, there's so much stuff they come home with that I kind of chuckle at because it's not important, but they're learning how to handle these relationships with honesty and directness and things. So it's fun to listen to their simple little life problems that mean nothing to you or me, but it means a lot to them, right? And with that honesty, I think there has to be an element where we're willing to open up and communicate that, and whoever's being the accountability partner or the association that's in our life has to be honest back to us. And I think that's the key to good accountability and moving and kind of hitting those targets the right way.
That's so good. I love that. Very cool. So tell us what you're most passionate about. Tell us some of the ranch deals you've done and what excites you about, selling ranches, and now you're working in Costa Rica. Tell us a little bit about what you're all doing, man.
Yeah. So I love the land. Like nothing excites me more than a day out of the office and just getting outside into the wilderness. And a lot of these biggest properties and ranches in the country have, 4,000, 10,000, even 100,000 acres of the most beautiful land in the country. And now moving with Fay Ranches International to Costa Rica, we're kind of expanding and seeing what we might be able to do internationally with some of these huge properties. It's just fun because I love every part of the land. And I think with the land comes an adventure, whether that adventure is the story, the land legacy that the former owners had for 3-4 generations, or maybe the future of what they want to do with modern day farming on that land. Or a lot of these properties have the recreational side, fishing and hunting and four-wheeling and horseback riding. And I'm an adventurer at heart. So the land and the wilderness it just makes me tick. And, Costa Rica is just outstanding. I moved down there from Wyoming, and you go to the beach and have a steak dinner and you go fish with the guy, and the whole thing's just like a simpler way of life than we're doing it in North America. And I just love the simplicity of it, but I still get the adventurous side to it. So there's great things to come for me and my family and our land sales and all that. But most importantly, our legacy is being built that we want our children to continue just like we're doing.
That's so cool. I love it. So in wrapping up, I always have 3 final questions, and then anything that we didn't touch on that you think our listeners, should. And guys, obviously reach out if you want to learn some more about ranches and any of the stuff we talked about. All of JW's notes, our links and all that stuff in the show notes. But first and final question is, if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence that you could say that could help them find it?
All right, I'm going to have you repeat it because the airport lady just went off.
I got you.
I couldn't hear you.
All right, if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence that you would say that could help them find their purpose?
I think you need to become self-aware of your skills and strengths and your weaknesses, and so just become self-aware of who you are and don't care what the rest of the world thinks about that. Just know who you are and be that person, authentic to the world around you.
Love it.
That was like 5 sentences.
It's all good. Be authentic. Got it. Number 2 is, what's a favorite quote? I'm sure you have more than one, but what's a favorite quote that comes to mind and why?
So, I got so many quotes I love. I get files of quotes I've saved and all that kind of stuff. So I like the quote that, let me get it right because it's kind of an alliterated little thing, but prior planning prevents a poor performance. So he's with us going back to the start of your show here. My grandfather, one of my best friends and mentors, he always used to tell me prior planning prevents a poor performance. So I've always loved it.
That's so good. And third and final question is, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
It happened again.
I love it. All right, you run into someone in a coffee shop or the airport, whatever, and they're like, hey, that was awesome. Working on like that accountability. I think that was huge. If anyone was paying attention, I think that was something to definitely really pay attention to, is having someone to be accountable to and pick numbers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But what's something that we didn't touch on today that you just think would be really impactful for our listeners to know?
Sure. So I'm a big fan of the whole vision board idea, right? And it's kind of become like something that's tossed around the internet all over the place, but I've drastically changed my life in the last 6 years, both with my salary, my health, my personal growth, all this, by simply waking up and looking at certain things of where I want to be, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years from now. And it's coming true. It doesn't come through tomorrow morning, but it just keeps me taking those actionable steps towards those things. And for some reason, it's just always in the back of my mind then. And I think if our vision is the next reel on Instagram or YouTube Shorts, then that's exactly what we're going to get, somebody else's vision, not our own. So we didn't touch on it. A lot of big time influencers are out there talking about it. It's a big thing and it changed my life. So don't be afraid to pursue that little line of thought and learn more about it.
Vision board. I love it. That's so cool. Guys, let's share this. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, go out there. If we can change one life or one starfish at a time together, we can change the world. Thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it.